And joining me now to talk more about this is RT contributor Wayne Madsen. Now, Wayne, I know you couldn't, I think you heard part of that story. Now, I think her question at the end, do these methods that the U.S. is using, panic buttons for activists, training activists essentially, does that undermine the sovereignty of other countries?
Well, one could argue is the cyberspace recognize international boundaries, and many people would say no. So this is an issue, but this is something, although we see this concept of cyber war, information warfare playing out with sock puppets and fake Twitter accounts, this is something the CIA has used since its creation, using the media, the popular media at the time, to push out its propaganda. In 1960, they had Radio Swan on the Honduran island of Swan Island in the Caribbean. It was used to pump out propaganda for the Bay of Pigs invasion. Now we're seeing Twitter being used, obviously, to foment the rebellion in Libya.
So is this a lot of hullabaloo over nothing? Is this just the next generation of psychological operations?
That's exactly what it is. And you know, you look back at the history of the CIA manipulating the media at the time, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. What's interesting is George Soros took over a lot of the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty functions, and Radio Free Asia. He obviously has been involved with many of these NGOs that have been responsible for some of these activities in these countries where we've seen rebellions. Not that the rebellions themselves were wrong, but people like Soros and the CIA, who works closely with them, try to co-opt these rebellions, soft landings.
Soros and the CIA?
Well, they're very connected because Soros took over this Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty archives in Prague. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty were CIA fronts funded by the CIA. So we see all these connections between the Central Intelligence Agency, USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, and George Soros' Open Society Institute and Foundation.
Well, just because there are, you know, you connect the dots like this and people have owned the same enterprises doesn't mean that they're working together.
But they have the same goals. The goals are to make sure that whatever government comes in Libya, increasingly that's looking like, and Sarkozy had his fingerprints in on this Libyan rebellion even before it started, from all reports. They want to make sure that the government that comes in is one that's sort of beholden to their friends, the World Bank, the IMF, the international corporations. And
Soros just had a meeting because he wants to reform the IMF and the World Bank. You don't buy that?
No, I don't buy it. If he wants to reform it, it's not in the interests of the the people around the world. It's in the interests of the venture capitalists and what I call the vulture capitalists, and what we're seeing in Portugal and other countries. These are rebellions too. What happened in the Arab world started out as a rioting against high prices of food, high unemployment, and obviously there was some interest by outsiders to try to influence the events, and we saw that happen. But I think in Egypt and Tunisia, it got out of control. They could not control the outcome of these rebellions.
We're getting a little off topic. Let's get back to the technological aspects of this. I want to ask you, of course, we just heard in that story that actual internet access in Libya is so small, just 5%. But yet we hear about the role of these Twitter, activists and activists on Facebook that are, can tweet and say, we're being killed, we're being massacred, we need help, those sorts of things. Is the joke on the U.S. if the U.S. is really looking at these as evidence that intervention needs to be the answer?
Well, I think the U.S. is probably behind these Twitter feeds. We don't even know if they came from Libya. They could have come from neighboring Arab countries where people, are conversant in Arabic, or they could have come from outside the region as well. They could have come easily from Langley, Virginia, or a number of military bases where there are cyber command activities present that do this type of thing. It's their mission.
The United States, from my understanding of the law, isn't allowed to engage in psychological operations that are black operations where the source isn't revealed at home. Like, for example, with the sock puppets, the fake Facebook accounts, in order to influence the conversation abroad, those have to be in another language. They can't be in English. You can't target Americans. Do you buy that?
Well, what happens, and this, it's called the blowback effect. The CIA used to plant stories in foreign newspapers that would be picked up by the wire services and put in U.S. papers. It was CIA disinformation. Now, maybe it was intentional or maybe unintentional, but that is always the effect of pushing out this propaganda. You can get the blowback effect, and it could wind what you place on Twitter feed in Libya today may be on NBC News tomorrow being reported as actual news.
Even if it's in another language?
Well, be translated into English, and we have a lot of people. The Foreign Broadcast Information Service translates this for the CIA, and then this is pumped out to the U.S. media and international media as well.
So who do you think is really winning in this use of cyber tactics and, some would call it warfare with non-state actors, state actors like the United States getting in the game? Who stands to benefit the most?
Right now, I'd say it's a draw, because look at what's happening on the ground in Libya. It's basically a stalemate. Gaddafi did not go away as everybody thought he was. He's actually entrenching his forces in Tripoli. So I would say that the success of the program, the propaganda program, it did not succeed in getting rid of Gaddafi. I would say that the program so far is a failure for the United States and NATO.
So you're saying the U.S. is the loser in this. One thing I want to ask about the story, too, she kind of pointed out the irony that the United States government helps to remove firewalls to the Internet in the Middle East and in China. Meanwhile, U.S. corporations put up those firewalls to do business in countries that censor the Internet. Do you see an irony there? I don't. I mean, corporations are beholden to capitalism. They're beholden to their shareholders. I wouldn't expect them to just kowtow to whatever U.S. government policy is.
Well, but we see a relationship, and we've seen this for quite some time, between the U.S. intelligence agencies and Google and others that obviously they know who butters their bread, and they're going to do what the agency asks them to do, or in the military, the Pentagon. So you can put up the firewalls and take them down. It depends on the situation. I would say that the U.S. right now would be very interested in creating a firewall in Bahrain, for example, where we want to support.
The U.S. corporations already censor the Internet in Bahrain. Do you believe the government is behind that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We want to support that regime because we have a huge naval base there and want to keep it there. Same thing with Saudi Arabia, Oman, and other countries.
But what leads you to believe that there's actually that exact line where the U.S. government can actually influence a corporation when things hit the fan in Bahrain to say, hey, censor the Internet?
Oh, the cooperation between the U.S. government and U.S. high-tech companies is legendary. AT&T, Google, it's across the board. We see this kind of situation. The CIA has its own venture capital firm called In-Q-Tel that actually provides seed money for a lot of these high-tech firms that come up with some of this censorware.
And then there's the power of corporations that they have over Washington, which also influences it the other way. So it's difficult to see how the things shake out. Thanks so much, Wayne. That was investigative journalist Wayne Madsen.